Thank you very much. Let me start by recognizing the Vice Chancellor of the University of Dar, Salaam. Permit me also to recognize the Deputy Vice Chancellor and to recognize Professor Penina Mlama. And in the audience, permit me to recognize Mzee Warioba, my Lord, I recognize you. I also take this opportunity to recognize the other academics who are present here, the students who are here, and members of the press. I'm so very happy to be invited once again to be present with you to celebrate and commemorate the life and times of Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. I first came to Tanzania as a student on the 9th day of December 1984 when I was a student leader at the University of Nairobi, and the then President of Kenya invited me, among other students, to accompany him. And that is when I met Mwalimu Nyerere. I then, 10 years later, in 1994, visited at the invitation of Professor Harub Othman on the occasion of 40 years of celebration of leadership in Africa. And that is when I formally was introduced to Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere and his foundation. It therefore gladdens my heart that I'm in the country of a man whom I admire and in a hall that is named after another great African, the Osagyefo, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. The subject that has preoccupied us in the last few days is one that is as topical as it is relevant. The rise or fall of Africa on account of the African politician. And in order to do justice to that subject, and to remain faithful to my chosen subject, which is a call for hygiene in African politics, there is a sense in which one must take a historical journey, if only to appreciate the factors that animated Africans to seek to regain their independence from the colonial masters. Historians will remind us that we were first enslaved, that Africans were taken, and this we seldom say. The first civilization to take Africans out of this continent were the Arabs. And they took Africans from the eastern coast. And it's sad that in that part of the world, there are not many Africans who remained, because it was in the business of the Arab enslaver to castrate Africans. We never say that, but we must say it because it is historically significant. Then the Europeans came, the Portuguese came, the Spaniards came, the Germans came, the French came, the Belgians came. Africa became the hunting ground for the European colonizers, and we were the spot. Our ancestors built the United States of America. Our ancestors built Europe. And when slavery had lost its shine and sheen, the Europeans abolished it. But they replaced it with yet another pernicious enterprise, the colonization of Africa. The Europeans sat in Berlin, in Germany, in 1884, and they looked at the map of Africa and parceled it out. The British had their share, the Germans had their share, and Tanzania or Tanganyika was their share, as was Rwanda and Burundi. The Spaniards were Johnny-come-latelys in the arena, and they got little Equatorial Guinea and Southwest Africa. The French were here, the Portuguese were here, and we were colonized. This time round, they did not take us away. They came here, and they controlled us, and they told us, not in so many words, that we were children of a lesser God. And we were treated as if we were children of a lesser God. In fact, they told us that on the day of creation, we were merely hewers of wood and drawers of water. And if anybody were to doubt it in 1948, it was more blatant when Hendrik Verwoerd instituted the apartheid regime in South Africa. But yet there is a sense in which the God that we worship never sleeps. The colonial enterprise ran its course, and the European tribes, the Europeans never called themselves tribes, they called them nations, were engaged in a war. First in 1918, the European tribes fought. And they had something called the League of Nations, which died. Then they fought again in 1945. And what is unique about the European nations is that when they are engaged in tribal wars, they call them world wars. So there was another war between 1945, 1939 and 1945, and after that, a new kid on the block, the United States of America, took the lead in saying that colonialism was something that was undesirable. But at that time, Africans were never quiet. Those who had been taken out had already started agitating. Many of us here will remember Marcus Garvey, of whom Bob Marley says, Garvey was a buffalo soldier in the heart of America. And many of us will remember W.E.B. Du Bois. Many of us will remember that they started agitating that Africans must regain their dignity and their independence. And indeed, in 1847, in Liberia, a small group of Africans were brought back in Monrovia, and Liberia became the first independent black nation in the continent of Africa. So soon thereafter, in Sierra Leone, they also created yet another colony. But Africa was colonized, except Ethiopia, which they tried to take in 1938 and exiled Professor Dr. Haile Selassie, and unfortunately they were defeated, as you remember, in the Battle of Adwa. Africa can defeat European tribes. This history is necessary that we are able to appreciate the freedom that we gained. So that Garvey came, W.E.B. Du Bois came, but there was another crop after the 1940s who had the advantage of European education. And there were people in Europe also who are beginning to recognize that indeed equality was necessary. And this was not anything new. In 1776 in the United States of America, the American state sitting in Philadelphia in the United States of America declared unto themselves that all men are born equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. A few years later in France, after the revolution, they also recognized that we were to be equal, so that the colonized nations which had now taken Africans thought that they were safe. They had taken Leopold Sédar Senghor from Senegal to Paris, and they thought that they were creating a little Frenchman. Little did they know that they were creating somebody who would want to overthrow them. They took Félix Houphouët-Boigny from Côte d'Ivoire, and they thought that they were creating somebody who would be subservient to them. They took Ahmed Sékou Touré and Modibo Keïta, and they thought they were safe. Little did they know that they were creating the future leaders and agitators against French colonization. And it did not stop there. The Portuguese also took Agostinho Neto and Amilcar Cabral and Eduardo Mondlane to Lisbon. Little did they know that those individuals would be the catalyst that would be necessary in the process of decolonization. The British also had their fair share. They took others. They took Mwalimu Kambarage Nyerere, Hastings Kamuzu Banda, Kenneth David Kaunda, and many others to the United Kingdom, Jomo Kenyatta. Little did they know that those would be the individuals who sometimes later, and in Ghana, of course, they took the Osagyefo, Kwame Nkrumah, and in Nigeria, they took Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, and Sir Ahmadu Bello, the Sultan of Sokoto. There is a sense, therefore, in which these individuals started recognizing that having been enslaved, having been colonized, we now had to liberate ourselves. And the agitation started, and Kwame Nkrumah and his Ghana acquired independence in 1957. And I still can hear Kwame Nkrumah through the vicissitudes of time saying in Accra, Ghana, that Ghana is free and will never be colonized again. But the freedom of Ghana means nothing if the rest of Africa is not free. I can hear Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere saying that he is prepared to delay the independence of Tanganyika so that Tanganyika, Kenya, Uganda would become independent at one time. Mwalimu could see the future with the exactitude of a Jewish prophet. Jomo Kenyatta and Obote could not. And therefore, we gained independence as separate states, and the story will be told shortly. So what do we see? The agitation, the demand by the people that we must be decolonized. And why is it that we were asking that we must be decolonized? Why is it that we were demanding that we must regain our independence? Because throughout the ages, it was always the divine plan that men must be masters of their destiny. And when we gained our independence, the leaders of the day were eloquent as they were clear that the reason why we were asking to be independent is because we wanted to take charge of our affairs. We wanted to be the governors. We wanted to have our young men and women acquire education. We wanted to control the production of our food through agriculture. We wanted to build our infrastructure. We wanted to improve the quality of the lives of our people by improving their health. We wanted to eliminate poverty. We were clear on what we wanted, and this message was as clear in West Africa as it was clear in East Africa, as it was clear in Central Africa, as it was clear in Northern Africa, so that if you listen to Kwame Nkrumah, it's as if you'd listen to Agostinho Neto, and if you listen to Neto, it's as if you'd listen to Samora Moses Machel, and if you listen to Ahmed Ben Bella in the Maghreb, it's as if you'd listen to Patrice Emery Lumumba. There is a sense in which there was unanimity that this was the only way, and we attained independence. And I remember so very vividly in 1957, in Casablanca, Morocco, was it in 1960, when the then 8 independent African countries met on the Osagie for Kwame Nkrumah, was clear that we must ensure that everybody else regains their independence, and that we must remember that the colonial master is not asleep, and that if we don't unite, he'll come under other guises through the neo-colonial project, but they listened to Kwame Nkrumah not. And even before they assembled in 1963, in the month of May in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, no sooner had countries started attaining independence that the neo-colonial project started taking root. And in 1960, the first coup d'etat and assassination took place in Togo when Sylvanus Olympio was eliminated. 1 year later, Patrice Emery Lumumba was eliminated. So that in 1963, in the month of May, when 32 heads of states and government assembled in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, there were several speeches, but 3 speeches stand out. Kwame Nkrumah's speech, Mwalimu Kambarage Nyerere's speech, and Emperor Haile Selassie's speech. Haile Selassie was the host, and his own inimitable style, he reminded the congregation who are present in Africa Hall in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, that was a momentous occasion, and that the long-term health of Africa not only required but demanded that Africa must pull in the same direction, Haile Selassie said. And Mwalimu took the baton from Haile Selassie and repeated the same words, celebrating the fact that we were independent and we had the opportunity of determining in our affairs. But the greatest of the speeches was that of the Osagie for Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah had a sense of urgency which everybody else did not have. He said, not in so many words, but in effect, that if we want to immunize ourselves from the diabolical machinations of the erstwhile colonial master, now turned neo-colonizer, we have to move here as one Africa, with the United States of Africa, with one army, with one currency, with one central bank, and with one nation. But they listened to him not. They had started getting used to the trappings of power. So what they came out with on that day in the month of May 1963 was a weak organization of African unity, the OAU, which many commentators were quick to describe in many ways and many times as the toothless bulldog. It was never a dog. It did not have teeth, but the effect of it is that it did not do very much. Some say it was a talking shop. Mzee Warioba, who was then active in political life and in other sectors, will attest to that. Yet later, we were to create another body, the African Union, and we'll have something to say about that. So we come out of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia in 1963, clear as to what we want to do. The African politician begins to emerge. We have them in different parts, but they begin to show characters that are totally inimical to our expectations. You of the Swahili say, maskini akipata matako huliambwata. Maskini walipata matako zililiambwata. They started getting used to the trappings of power. And we started having countries which we thought would liberate us And I'm talking about the hygiene of the politics. It started disappearing. Many of these individuals now thought that they were demigods, suffering from what I call the Messiah complex, thinking that they had been brought to Africa to liberate her, and that they suffered from two major diseases. One of them is the martyr syndrome, and the other one is the Messiah complex. They think that their countries owed them. Africa started producing leaders that one cannot recognize. How many of you will forget Jean Bedel Bokassa of Central African Republic, that man who murdered little children in the streets because they did not buy uniform from his wife? That's Jean Bedel Bokassa. How many of you will forget Mobutu Sese Seko Kukumbendu wa Nzambanga, who changed his country's name and presided over a kleptocratic regime? The Democratic Republic of Congo is the richest resource country on earth. Conservatively, it is said that under her belly, she has minerals, which is equivalent to 34.1 trillion United States dollars. And yet today, it is one of the poorest nations on earth. It is the only nation on earth which on the day of the election has its president saying, we know we ought to have elections, but we have no money to hold elections. When you see a country which has as its official name the Democratic Republic of Congo, know that there is no democracy. In fact, I dare say that any country, two countries that I know insisting on having as a part of the official name the Democratic Republic of something are never democratic. The other one is Korea, the People's Democratic Republic of Korea. It's as if when you can't graduate to be a doctor, you go to the church and you ask to be baptized as Dr. Mwadime. But that is not the point. The point is that who can forget Mobutu Sese Seko? Who can forget Idi Amin of Uganda? Who can forget Mengistu Haile Mariam of Ethiopia? And one can go on and on, because hygiene had started disappearing from African politics. Our agriculture was beginning to suffer. European musicians who had a little sense of guilt came to perform in Africa, Bob Geldof, to free the Ethiopians out of hunger. There was no hygiene in our politics. We could not run our education systems. Our young men and women were going to India because the budgets meant for education were consumed by individuals whom we had entrusted with the task of presiding over it. Our health sectors were beginning to collapse. And as I've said before, the political leadership did not have any faith in those institutions. Typically, the typical African politician, perhaps not in Tanzania today, if they were sick, they had a cold, they would not go to Muhimbili, they would go to London. If they were Kenyan, they would not go to Kenyatta Hospital, they would run to the United Kingdom. Tragedy. No hygiene in our politics, because Africans had started engaging in theft. In fact, I used to say that African politicians were thieves. Then I went to Uganda and I was told that they are not thieves, they are looters. And when I went to Liberia last week, I was told they are not looters. I was told they are looters on an industrial scale. That is the logical metamorphosis of the African politician, whose appetite for public wealth is completely insatiable. Hygiene was disappearing from African politics. And we could see the effect of the disappearance of hygiene in African politics. But there was always the erstwhile colonial master to assist. Coup d'etats, started visiting Africa. Modibo Keita in Mali was consumed. Nnamdi Azikiwe in Nigeria was consumed. The Osagie for Kwame Nkrumah was consumed. Apollo Milton Obote was consumed. Amilcar Cabral in Guinea-Bissau was consumed. Patrice Emery Lumumba was consumed. Coups were so frequent in Africa that Afro-pessimists were now hard to say that coups were as frequent as breakfast. But even breakfast was not frequent on African tables. We could not feed ourselves because there was no hygiene in African politics. Your typical African politicians took the view that they had a divine mission to preside over their countries. They arrogated to themselves the monopoly of wisdom. If you listen to some of them, and I listen to the radio announcements announcing the activities of one leader of an African country, Habyarimana Juvenal, it would take 3 minutes to say the things that he had done.